Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the September 11th, 2018 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It's my privilege to call tonight's meeting to order. If you haven't already done so, copies of our agenda are on either side of the room. Please feel free to pick up a copy. You can follow along with tonight's proceedings. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to items that are on tonight's agenda, as well as a segment that is under item 4, which is reserved for public comments of a general nature. At that point in time, any residents or members of the audience who would like to ask any questions or make any comments of a general nature with respect to things that are not on tonight's agenda, that would be the time to come up, introduce yourself, and we'll welcome hearing from you at that time. But first, it is our proud custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. And tonight we have some special guests who are going to help us lead us in the pledge. I would like to invite up Webelos PAC 227. We have some fine representatives here who are going to head on up to the front. Good evening, gentlemen. These gentlemen are all fine, outstanding students at Kingsley School here in Downers Grove, and they are going to pause for a moment while Doug takes a picture, and then we're all going to stand, and they're going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And then after the Pledge of Allegiance, ladies and gentlemen, I ask that everyone please remain standing. Gentlemen, flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If everyone could remain standing, please. Gentlemen, thank you very much. You can stay there. It is now my honor to introduce on September 11th, which is Patriot Day. We are very privileged to have members of the Downers Grove Choral Society here, led by Joe Sveda, who will be leading us in singing the national anthem, and then we will have a patriotic selection following that. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose flushed stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bomb bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
And we will be singing America the Beautiful, and we will start with the third verse, which is a commemoration of the heroes.
Oh, beautiful for heroes proved in liberating strife, who bore himself their country love and mercy.
Webelos, you guys are free to sit down. As is everyone else. Thank you to the Downers Grove Choral Society for being here tonight and making our commemoration of Patriot Day, a very special occasion. It has been said that freedom isn't free and that it is something too often tragically secured by the sacrifices of both the brave and the innocent. Today, on the 17th anniversary of the savage attacks on our nation and the tragic loss of life on September 11, 2001, we pause to somberly reflect upon those terrible events, to remember and mourn the many lives that were lost and impacted, and to acknowledge how we as a nation came together as one in a time of great crisis. Stemming from a national day of prayer and remembrance that was proclaimed in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, September 11th has been since proclaimed and designated as Patriot Day in the United States as a day to encourage remembrance, prayer, or public service. So while we remember and never forget, we also pause to celebrate our civic pride as a nation and to appreciate not only those first responders who sacrificed their all that terrible day, but also all those first responders who do the jobs that we can't, so that we can live safe and free. Before moving on with our business tonight, I would like to share a quote with you from Manoj J. Savage, who said these words over a century ago, but they remain relevant today. "The brave die never, though they sleep in dust. Their courage nerves 1,000 living men." And in closing, I just want to thank the Downers Grove Choral Society once again, and I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone, or take the opportunity to remind everyone, that on Sunday, November 4th, 2018 at 4 p.m., they are holding a concert at First United Methodist Church. And if you liked what you saw and heard today, that was only the traveling chorus of the full ensemble. I would encourage everyone to check them out. We are truly blessed to have a number of fantastic artistic groups in our community, not the least of which is the Downers Grove Choral Society, and we're deeply grateful for them being here today and commemorating Patriot Day with us today. So thank you for that. With that, I would like to ask our fine village clerk to please call the roll.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Earl?
Here.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner White?
Here.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett?
Here.
Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 3, which pertains to the minutes of our past council meetings. We have one set of minutes to review and approve tonight. Those are our minutes from our September 4th, 2018 meeting. If there are no changes, comments, concerns, corrections, or otherwise, I would ask for a motion to approve, please.
Mayor Tully, I move that council approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are approved. And that brings us to item 4, which is earlier advertised, is set aside for public comments of a general nature. If there are any members of the audience that have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to things that are not on tonight's agenda, I would invite you to please come to the podium, let us know who you are, and we would welcome hearing from you. Good evening, Mr. Roll.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, and staff, village staff. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Before I get into my hard ideas here, I wanted to share with you a little history. I happen to sit in this seat here, and a week ago, I went to a birthday party for David Olson, our state representative, and those of you who were on the council at the time might recall that David used to come and sit there in a suit and a tie and a notepad. That's where he started his quest for council and his quest for government service in that seat. And when I sat there, I said, I'm going to take a minute and bring this back to your memories. The younger ones on the council won't remember that, but the old timers, like myself, will recall that.
Well, be careful where you sit, Mr. Roble. You don't know what comes next.
I'm a little too old to do that. So, secondly, the reason I came today is I had, being Patriots Day, and it's also a meeting of the DuPage County Board, and I happened to go out to DuPage, to Wheaton this morning. Was there at 10 o'clock on Patriots Day. They did a beautiful tribute like you have done here. Many of the commissioners spoke to it. But one of the things that was very interesting is something that's very in the news right now, and it concerns our neighbor community, Willowbrook. The DuPage County Board was addressed by 3 very passionate citizens of Willowbrook and Darien, talking about the Sterogenics is the company that's had the problem with their chemicals. And I wanted to let you know that I thought, if I remember correctly, they passed a resolution. If Willowbrook is not able to take away their license to operate in that location, that the DuPage County will be probably proceeding. I'm not, don't quote me as 100%, but to my recollection, DuPage County is going to move to take their license away to perform their services in that location. And one of the residents informed us that they don't actually sterilize the instruments. That's done in hospitals, but they have a system where they bring in carloads or boxes, pallets with things, and they put them in this container, and they sterilize them, and then they deliver them throughout the area. So what their thought was that this could be located any place far away from residents and people in a crowded neighborhood. So I wanted to ask you to update yourself with the DuPage County Board and to also support whatever they're doing. Because I live in South Downers Grove, and certainly if somebody in Darien gets the benefit of that kind of chemical experience, I don't want to participate. And so we encourage your support in that effort. That's number 1. Number 2, since I'm feeling better, I haven't been here for quite a while, but it's the time of year where I have to get my juices in order. And I went to the DuPage County Board meeting this morning to talk about airplane noise in District 3, which is my district. Encompasses Willowbrook, Darien, Burr Ridge, Downers Grove, Bolingbrook, Westmont, Clarendon Hills, you name it, everything. And the problem continues, and I was very pleased to have opportunity to talk to some of the commissioners about it, so they're aware of it, and talked to the chairman, and he's aware of it. Apparently there's something going with the DuPage County Board right now that's addressing the noises that come from O'Hare, but they weren't at all informed about the noises that come out of Midway. And by chance, I was going out at 8:45 this morning, put my garage door up, and there was an airplane coming right over my house. And you ever heard a jet engine whine when it's got power on? I heard that, and I says, oh my God, it's too close, and he's powering up, going over my house. And I gave me some more energy, to get, that's why I'm here tonight. I spoke to you last year, June 13th. I addressed the council meeting and talked about my concern. In my notes mentioned that Mayor Tully wished me every success. Well, I'm trying again. So then David Fieldman was good enough to get Patty Bellock involved. She sent me a note saying that she was aware of the problems, but now she's safety director. She moved on upward. But the problem continues. And I'm very encouraged by the visit to the DuPage County Board that maybe this time we'll go someplace, because they seem to be, like myself, aware of the airplanes that come over the top of their properties. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention one of my colleagues, Buzz Wowell, passed me a copy of an article from the Wall Street Journal dated August 25th and 26th. It says, airplane noise complaints are soaring. And apparently someone invented a little widget, as he calls it in this article, where instead of calling in or sending an email, you just press this little button and it files a complaint. And so it said that the noise button is responsible for 226,366 noise objections from 10 different cities. So it's not just a Downers Grove or Chicago problem. And it mentioned particularly San Diego in the article that I read. It concerns most metropolitan areas. And there are ways to ask legislators and FAA to control the flight patterns, control the elevation. When I was a younger guy, there was an airplane flown by United Airlines. It was a French airplane, Caravel, not Caravel. Yeah, Caravel. It would take off from Midway or from O'Hare, and it would go straight up. It had two engines on the back. So other airplanes are capable of that, to get altitude, so you don't have to come over here. The other point I made with DuPage County was the fact that there's people who go in and out of Midway and O'Hare that pay fees to the city of Chicago for landing and taking off rights. And DuPage County doesn't participate in that. Use our airspace, but don't participate. And lastly, with the problem with Sterogenics, only time will tell with the increased air traffic over our beloved Downers Grove and the western suburbs, what's coming out of the sky from jet engine emissions. And thank God I haven't seen any blue snow yet, or blue ice, I should say. But at one time, blue ice was a problem in many metropolitan areas. That's my only comments. Thank you for giving me the time and not cutting me off.
No?
Thank you.
I think I gave you your time for a few meetings.
Okay. Thank you. Good to see you all again.
Thank you, Mr. Roble, and thanks for sharing your experiences with trying to address airport traffic noise. As we discussed before, it's obviously a regional issue, given where the airplanes go. Like mosquitoes, they don't respect political boundaries. So I'm glad to see that you've taken your comments to broader jurisdictions. Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience?
I have a question.
Please, and I just ask you to come to the podium because otherwise folks at home can't hear you. And I would hate for them to miss your question.
Very short, very simple.
Sure. Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Ann Connick.
Hi.
I have a comment, but it's about stormwater, so I'm assuming now is not the time to do that.
The stormwater regulations that we'll be discussing later tonight, there'll be an opportunity to discuss that when the presentation is made. Yes, so you're fine. When we get there,
Thanks.
that's on the agenda, so we will have
I
plenty of opportunities for
understand.
public comment then.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Appreciate it. Never hurts to ask. Any other questions or comments from members of the audience of a general nature with respect to things not on tonight's agenda? Okay, well, hearing nothing further, thank you for those comments. That brings us to item 5 on our agenda tonight. Oh, before we go to item 5, I was remiss in thanking one other person for the outstanding performance and appearance here tonight at the Downers Grove Choral Society, and that was Joyce Tamia. Joyce Tamia and the Downers Grove Choral Society have gone back, as she pointed out to me, to 1992. In fact, she showed me a copy of an article from the Suburban Life Graphic. I want to talk about old timers. Only some of us up here will remember that publication. And she was really instrumental in pulling this together and having them here tonight, so I was remiss in not thanking Joyce. It was terrific for her to do that. Now, we'll move on to item 5, which is our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Until I move the council approve the consent agenda as presented with the exception of item C, which I do not move be included.
Second.
All right, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda, sans item C, which is resolution 2018-7890. With that changes, are there any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to any of the non-removed items on tonight's consent agenda? Any questions or comments from members of the Village Council? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Barnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. Consent agenda with the removal passes unanimously. That brings us to item 6, which is our active agenda. We have one item on tonight's active agenda, and that's item 6A. Do I have a motion to adopt an ordinance amending certain liquor provisions?
Martello, I move the council adopt an ordinance amending certain liquor provisions as presented.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments on this item from any members of the audience? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Hearing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Earl? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Burnett?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, that matter passes unanimously, and that brings us to the end of our active agenda, and on to item 7, which is our first reading or our workshop agenda. We have one item on the workshop agenda tonight, and our workshop is a little bit different than the active agenda. That no formal action or decisions will be made tonight on this item. This is for presentation and discussion only. Typically, we ask our village staff, led by Village Manager David Fieldman, to present the item. The village council will have an opportunity to ask questions and make any comments, and then we'll open it up for any audience questions or comments. So with that, Mr. Fieldman, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Tully. Thank you. The only item on tonight's first reading agenda is consideration of an ordinance which would establish a special service area number 10 for the Bridge Point Downers Grove subdivision. If this looks familiar to you, that is because it has been on many previous agendas. This is the last step in a multiple-step process for creating the special service area that would be used to maintain a detention basin should the owner fail to do so according to our code requirements. You may recall Director Popovich has made presentations on this several times. So at this point, we're just here to answer any questions that you may have.
Very good. Thank you. Any questions from the village council? Any questions from members of the audience? Any final questions to the village council?
And that's it for the first reading. Thank you.
Very good. That ends our first reading and brings us to the mayor's report. And I'm going to defer my mayor's report to Commissioner Wallace, who I think was going to talk about what I was going to talk about. So I will defer to item 9, which is the mayor's report. Back to Mr. Fieldman.
Thank you. On the manager's report, we have a discussion of potential amendments to the stormwater management regulations. The council will recall that this is a priority action item that we have been working on this project for well over a year, probably closer to 2 years. Tonight, we have a revised set of proposed regulations based on previous discussions, particularly resident input and village council direction. We have a complete presentation on our website for those who would like to kind of dig in and understand a little bit more of the background on this item. But for tonight, what I'd like to do is jump right in to slide number 9, which is where we really lay out the proposed regulations. So as Mr. Baker helps me find slide number 9, proposed regulations. So you see in this table here we have the proposed regulations. These regulations are based on changes to impervious area on a residential site. So you often hear us refer to it as net new impervious area. These regulations shown here would apply to new single-family houses, new construction, and large additions, which we are classifying as 400 square feet of footprint expansion or more. As you see in this table, the amount of stormwater storage that would be required for these two types of development activities would range up to 250 cubic feet, plus any of the storage already required under our current code for best management practices. It is important to retain the existing best management practice storage requirements to provide the proper incentive to stay below that threshold of about 700 square feet of net new impervious area. So this is a pre-calculated amount of storage that would be required based on your change in new impervious area. In addition, we would require all sump pumps that were being installed in conjunction with a new foundation. They would also be required to provide 50 cubic feet of storage, really acting as an infiltration system designed to make sure that sump pump discharge does not negatively affect your neighbor. So on the next slide, we put together this table showing the requirements for a typical house in each of those net new impervious area categories. This is a look back. We're looking at the new house permits that took place in, this is just the proposed regulations showing what would be required in each of these categories. And you can see in the first category, if you're actually reducing the net new impervious area, you would be providing just the storage for the sump pump and the estimated cost of up to $7,000. And you can see as you go down the categories here that the storage volumes increase as we go based on the change in net new impervious area. And note on the estimated cost side that this tops out at the very largest projects in new homes at about $30,000, which is a relatively low cost compared to the total project cost of a new home or a major addition. And here's where I got ahead of myself a little bit. On the next slide, what we did here is we put together a table showing how these proposed regulations compare to our current regulations using our permit history of new houses over the last 2 years, sort of a look back. And you can see, using the same categories, that a high percentage of the new houses were actually in the negative to 700 square foot net new impervious area. When you look at this table, you will note that storage would be required to be provided in each and every category. That's a significant change from our current set of regulations where the first two categories are not required to provide any storage. And when you look at the bottom of the table, in the middle, you'll see the storage requirement comparison. Under our current code, just about 18,000 cubic feet of storage would be required. If we had these regulations in place over the last 2 years, it would be closer to 42,000 cubic feet of storage. That's over 2 times the amount of storage that would be required under these proposed regulations. On the next slide, we have a couple of photos of a shallow storage system. This was discussed at our last council meeting a few months ago. One of the best attributes of these proposed regulations is that all stormwater storage can be provided using a shallow storage system. And here's what it looks like. Once it's installed, it looks like somebody's yard. Basically is a yard. It's a usable yard space under most conditions. So we have this photo, and then another photo looks eerily similar. These are actual shallow storage systems that were recently constructed in our village. And to wrap up, we wanted to sort of summarize the impacts and results of these proposed regulations, and you'll see how they should tie in nicely to the direction that the council provided at the last meeting. First and foremost, these regulations, if in place, would provide a significant improvement over the current regulations. Again, about 2.3 times the amount of stormwater storage than are currently provided, and nearly 100% of all new houses would be required to provide on-site storage. Second key point, these regulations would provide enhanced stormwater mitigation for all properties. Because these could be built, these storage facilities could be built using shallow storage systems, they can be placed on any property in town with or without a connection to a public stormwater system and in all soil types. And you may remember one of our local home builders talked to us about that at the last meeting. The costs of complying with these regulations are a relatively small percentage of total project costs when you think about a brand new house or an addition of 400 square feet footprint or more, ranging from about $7,000 to $30,000, and these are very conservative numbers. As I mentioned earlier, they can be provided using the shallow storage construction techniques, which means that it has a minimal impact on the homeowner's yard. And in most cases, unless it's a series of significant rains or a large rain, most of the yard remains usable. Listening and responding to concerns from home builder community, these regulations are predictable and easy to calculate. You don't have to hire a design engineer on the front end to figure out how much stormwater storage you would have to provide, and it's built on our existing code, which our home building community is very familiar with and knows how to operate. Basically, home builders would be able to tell their future customers what they can expect at the front end of the project, including how it will affect their yard and how much the project will cost. On the village side, on the staff end, because we've set up this formula and table, it has a low administrative burden. We also don't have to go review additional sets of calculations. And the last bullet point here as we wrap up, it continues to provide incentives and reasons to avoid increases in impervious area. If you don't increase the amount of impervious area with your development, you're providing a very small amount of storage. And the greater increase you have in your impervious area, the more storage you are required to have. So the council told us to go back to the drawing board and come up with something that really was, I think the phrase was do no harm, and use a toolkit approach. The do no harm, we think these regulations will significantly comply with that direction. And the toolkit approach, we think we've hit that mark because this set of regulations offers the home builders and residents the opportunity to choose how they want to comply and how much storage is going to be based on the type of development they put forward. There's a lot of additional information in here. We're happy to go through any of that, should anybody have any questions. But really what we'd like to do is turn it back to the council. We have our engineering and planning staff here. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dave, and appreciate you summarizing what has been a year-long journey as we have mightily struggled with trying to achieve the right balance here. The mission objective seemed to be simple, which was don't do any harm, don't create any more headaches in terms of stormwater that we would then have to wrestle with as part of our stormwater management program. But in practice, it proved to be far more difficult than perhaps any of us initially imagined. And we've been down a number of different paths, each of which had its problems that I thought threatened the balance that we were trying to achieve between achieving the mission and the objective of this exercise, but then not unduly burdening residents and future residents who might want to enjoy our community and continue to live here. We also, I think, realized that perfect should not be the enemy of good, and we want to accomplish something. I appreciate the fact that this may be it. Not that it's the end-all, be-all, but after a year of effort, putting something into place that would have a meaningfully positive impact on solving the problem at hand, I think would be worth pursuing. So I'm anxious and looking forward to questions and comments from my colleagues as well as members of the audience. Again, we're not deciding this tonight. This is being presented by the manager for discussion and consideration. That would have to come back on a future agenda for a workshop, and then for a vote, there'll be at least multiple other opportunities for conversation before anything final and formal is done. With that, I'll start, as I mentioned, with the village council, and then we'll go to the audience in a little bit. I appreciate your patience. Any questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Barnett?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm not going to repeat what you said because you said it quite well. I just would want to chime in that I think we should pursue turning this into ordinance and getting it on an active agenda for us as soon as possible. The idea that perfect shouldn't be the obstacle to making progress is pretty important here. We've done a lot of good work with a lot of input from a lot of stakeholders in this, and there's a lot of reason to believe that this step forward would be a big step in the right direction. It's not all the way, but it's a lot more than what's in the past, and I think will help the future of our village by trying to set us on a different course for how we manage and how we expect builders and folks who are developing or redeveloping their own properties to manage the stormwater. I'll just put another note on there. I mentioned this to some of my colleagues last week. This is just as a frame of reference. It's certainly not science. But tonight on our active agenda, or on our consent agenda, we had two motions, D and E. It's like a little over $1 million that we spent on stormwater improvements in a couple of neighborhoods. And that was largely surface flooding management, largely nuisance kind of management. And it's not exact science, but if you look at those two neighborhoods and you look at the areas surrounding those LPDAs, you're talking about 40 homes approximately, which is between $25,000 and $30,000 a house of public funds. Now that's not how you drive policy, but I think if you took a look over time at either the long-range plan we have of $400-some million worth of work, or even these small snapshots of jobs we've done along the way, you'd find that those kinds of numbers are probably pretty much consistent, somewhere in that $15,000 to $30,000 a parcel range, whether they're when we buy properties and create, storage areas, or if we just do below-grade work. So as we sit up here and try and gauge, and as the public tries to gauge the value of $7,000 to $30,000, we're putting similar public money in to fix private property. So I'd encourage everybody to, those are big numbers. I don't want to understate those. They can still be pretty big numbers to a homeowner. But the effect on the public system is going to be similar. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions or comments from members of the council? Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. I also think we should move forward with this. Is it absolutely perfect? Is it absolutely what I would come up with? Perhaps not, but I think it's a substantial step in the right direction. The do no harm concept has been key for me, and I think this is a very big step in that direction. Trying to make sure that we stop additional development from continuing to have us put 8, 9, 10, 11 gallons of water into a 5-gallon bucket. I think this will help to mitigate that, and I look forward to looking at the impact in future years to see if maybe there are additional tweaks that we should make to it, or whether it's doing the job that we want it to do. But I think we should move forward with it as soon as possible. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other questions? Commissioner Wallace?
I just wanted to quickly thank staff for coming up with this proposal. They know very well how somewhat stressful I find this topic to be every time we discuss it, because it is such a large issue in our community, and because we continue to hear that we have to do something. So while this plan is not totally perfect, I do think that it is a step in the right direction, and I'm hoping that it will allow residents to feel a little bit better about new developments that are happening in their area, additions that are happening in their area, and put some people at peace and at ease. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I would probably hazard to say it's probably a lunge in the right direction. It's more than a step, but perhaps not a leap.
I'll go with lunch.
We'll go with lunch. Commissioner Waldeck, good evening.
Thank you. Yeah, I know staff is always looking for direction. I won't repeat everything that's said because I agree with what's been said before. So I am pleased with this, and I'm ready to move forward with these concepts, and we'll see what happens when they're brought forward in ordinance form. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ladies first. Commissioner Earl.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to staff. I won't go into it all over again. Everybody said everything. We've all been working on this a long time and very hard. We all have heard your comments, and we're determined to do something about it, and the sooner we can implement this, the better it'll be for everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner White.
Very briefly, I agree with everything that's been said already, but I would want to add that personally, I'd be willing to go farther. But I think I don't want that to block us going forward as quickly as possible with what's here. So if an ordinance is drafted based on this evening's presentation, I'm 100% voting for it. But again, I want to make it clear for the record that I personally think we could go farther, but I'm not going to let that block our progress now.
Thank you, Commissioner. And again, we're not voting anything tonight. What would happen is if council were to give direction to staff, an ordinance would be prepared that would implement what the village manager presented. That ordinance would be brought back for a workshop meeting, and then based on that, a future voting meeting. But tonight, we're obviously, this is a point in what's been a long journey, but we're still having the conversation. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions or comments on the proposed changes to our stormwater regulations. We'd welcome hearing from you. Please. Good evening, welcome.
Good evening. And thank you for letting me speak. Sounds like you've heard all you really want to hear about stormwater and how it's impacting the residents. But I would like to make one more personal comment, if that's okay.
Of course.
And I've written it out, so I'll read it. My name is Ann McConaughey. I live at 4601 Oakwood Avenue. 33 years ago, I moved into a little Cape Cod house on a lot that was 50 feet wide and 300 feet long. I fell in love with the lot full of trees even before I saw the inside of the house. Our lot always flooded during heavy rain. But in 2007, my neighbors and I began to notice a change in the flooding. More water, rivers running down from the hill up on Middaugh Avenue. There were homes up there that had been torn down and rebuilt. The rain was leaving trails in the grass. We investigated and took pictures of the huge houses being built on Middaugh with cement driveways, patios, and basketball courts covering much of the permeable ground on the lots. Then we took our pictures and headed for meetings with the village. At these meetings, it was explained to us that there was more water, not because of the building on Middaugh. It was perhaps because of a 100-year storm or climate change. They told us about a cost share program that would have the village contribute money if we wanted to put in a gravity drain that would take the water from our backyards into the storm sewer. We decided as a group to do this, and it helped, but not enough. I lost a beautiful mature oak tree because of the increase in water on its root system. Then I lost another beautiful oak tree to the gravity drain cutting through its root system. And all our backyards, part of an LPDA, became unusable for many weeks out of the year, too damp and muddy for our kids to play in or our dogs to run in. Then the building boom came to Oakwood Avenue. Giant houses were being built where smaller ones had once stood. They stretched from lot line to lot line. They dwarfed the houses of long-term residents. They caused more flooding problems for their neighbors. In 2 instances, lots that we were told were unbuildable have been built on. We don't know how that came about. My neighbors and I asked several village employees to attend a meeting we had at my house, and they did. We wanted them to see what was happening on our one block. 4 houses are in various stages of construction at once. Our block is one big construction zone with huge trucks and cranes arriving daily. The street is clogged with them. They close the street and sidewalks when they want. They park wherever they want. Our children can't walk on sidewalks on both sides of the street, and if they cross, they can't be seen between these vehicles. Their work starts at 7 a.m. and goes until after 8:30 sometimes. I have had to go to the site next to my house and remind them to leave at 7. Finally, I started calling the police. It was happening so often. Their generators run constantly, and they are watering grass seed 24/7. The 3 village employees were kind enough to give up an evening to hear our concerns and have tried to intervene. I have some more basic questions for the council than these construction issues. And they are, how can the village allow 4 houses to be built at once on one block? How can people be allowed to build giant houses that impact their neighbors' homes so negatively? How can the village allow them to build into an LPDA and then to completely change the lay of the land to move the LPDA back and in the process damage trees? How can the village designate our lots as an LPDA, a water retention area, without my consent? How can they take my property and use it for stormwater retention without my consent or any reimbursement? How can they charge me bi-monthly stormwater fees when I am providing stormwater retention for free to the village against my will? How can they cause an entire neighborhood to be taken over and changed? The street that we all once loved has become unrecognizable. Thank you.
Thank you, and obviously you asked many questions, probably a dozen. I would hope that I would have the opportunity to talk with you about them offline.
Okay.
Rather than go through them now, if that's okay with you.
Yes, it is.
But I'd love to answer each and every one of them.
Okay, and I have copies of them if you would like.
That would even be better if you'd like to send them by email, then all of us can respond.
I will do that.
And there are some quick answers to some of those, and others are things that community's been struggling with for decades.
And I've been here for decades and watched it.
Then you've seen it firsthand.
Yeah.
But thank you for sharing
Thank you very
your
much.
concerns, and thank you to our staff for sitting down with the neighborhood.
It was very helpful. On their own time.
We do try. Thank you. Other questions or comments from members of the audience on this item? Please, sir, if you could. Good evening, welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Gordon Ferguson. I live at 4547 Oakwood Avenue. Ann McConaughey happens to be my neighbor. And first, I'd like to start out by saying that I support the proposed stormwater regulations. I heard the comments of Commissioner Hosey, and I believe in the principle of do no harm. Having new construction on upland lots responsible for managing their own stormwater is definitely a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, for those of us who live on Oakwood Avenue, it's a little too late. Most of the development has already occurred on our street, and as Ann has mentioned, and we can all agree that stormwater runs downhill into low areas, but we can also agree that the addition of large square footage of impervious surfaces without sustainable stormwater best management practices adds to drainage and discharge and conveyance of stormwater into downslope properties. Also, those of us who live in LPDAs have the concern, and it's my concern, that the approach of the village is not to implement infrastructure or measures to alleviate a lot of the problems in LPDAs, even though Mr. Barnett says the village is making some strides in that direction, but rather to institute an administrative control to designate LPDAs, to restrict the use of people's property that are in LPDAs. And in one sense, it sort of feels like a taking of our property, as a utility company might do to a landowner when they want to site a power line. However, the difference is that where a utility company would pay for an easement, the village has not. Residents in LPDAs were actually, in one respect, providing a service for the village, for which we are not being compensated. We're providing valuable stormwater detention on our properties, while in the past, development on upland areas has not been regulated. I also wanted to just mention or echo Ann's concerns that development, I think we all want to see development and economic growth in Downers Grove. I think we're all behind that. But I think there's got to be a balance, and I think it should be sustainable. I think that we should weigh the concerns of long 20, 30-year residents with the concerns of Downers Grove's newest additions that are buying large lots and building homes in the community. I understand it's important to grow the tax base, but I do think that there should be a sense of fairness and that existing long-term property owners, I moved onto Stanley Avenue in 1990. I moved over to Oakwood in 1998. I've volunteered in the community, raised my children here, really enjoyed the village, but I think the character's changing a little bit. And I think people who are responsible for monitoring development and building permits should keep an eye on that. As Ann said, my concern was that on Oakwood, 4, and I think there's going to be a 5th house that's going to begin construction, have building permits on the same street that is a major access thoroughfare for Pierce Downer Elementary School. And all this development does prevent a little bit of a safety hazard. I noticed construction without traffic safety plans in place, without police cars flagging. I don't think there are any requirements on having traffic control plans for development. So these are things, I guess I just felt as though people didn't put on their thinking caps when they approved 4 or 5 building permits on the same block in the same season. Some other suggestions I have, I actually work in the stormwater permitting and environmental consulting realm. I think that some of the development requirements that are currently in place aren't being implemented. Silt fences are not being installed properly. They're not being keyed in or towed in. I actually have a suggestion there. You should change the requirements to allow builders to use composite filter sock or silt worms instead of silt fence. They're easier to install, easier to maintain, and they're more effective. We see that dumpsters are not being covered, which is both a safety hazard, and also you have stormwater that falls into the dumpsters and generates, wastewater and leachate out of the dumpsters. That's a concern. So those are just a few of my thoughts. I don't want to take up a lot of your time. I could certainly go on and have a lot to say, but I'll try to end on a positive note and say I support the proposed stormwater regulations. I think that that should move forward, but I think there should be a sense of fairness and balance at the village, and you should at least look after the concerns of long-term existing residences as well as you're currently looking after the concerns of developers and builders. Thank you.
Thank you, and obviously you covered a large swath of issues. Tonight, we're talking about proposed stormwater regulations that would affect new construction and things going forward. Clearly, this is going to have absolutely nothing to do with things that have already been built, and as I've often only half-kiddingly said, if I could go back in time to 1832 and ask Pierce Downer to unload his wagon and his horse in a different spot, he stopped in a high soil, a high clay content bowl that in many places, because of the topography, is a horrible place to manage stormwater in. The fact is, we are where we're at. A lot of things were built, including infrastructure, before there were any regulations. This is a town that was founded in 1832, and a lot of things were done before we even had a zoning ordinance. We didn't come into place until 1965, if I remember correctly. So a lot had already been built, and a lot of the, I mean, this is no consolation to anybody, but long-term residence goes back, in our case, almost 200 years. And a lot of the cards that we've been dealt with were dealt a long time ago before anyone in this room was born. That's not an excuse, it's just a reality. It's something we have to deal with. So I want to sort of take the issue that's on the table tonight, which is the sincere attempt of the council to try to minimize or prevent future problems by better managing and being much more restrictive with respect to new construction and major additions. And mind you, we already are far more restrictive than, say, what the county would allow, the county stormwater ordinances, and now we're going even more restrictive. And I'm not suggesting that I'm asking for any pat on the back for that, but we are trying to work through becoming increasingly more and more restrictive, which includes restricting property rights. And I want to point out that both of you had made comments about your property being restricted, but what we're talking about is restricting property. So an LPDA may restrict your property in the sense that you can't build on it, but that's exactly what we're being asked to do, is don't let people build on LPDAs. So it is all about a balance. It's not just builders and developers, it's residents who have been longtime residents and who would like to add an addition on their home because their family has grown, or they need to take in an in-law or something like that. It's not just the evil, faceless builder that comes from outside and then runs away. We're talking about people who have been long-term residents and who would like to maybe second generation, third generation family here and invest in our community. We don't want to discourage that, yet we don't want to create new problems. So that's what we've been struggling with. Going backwards in terms of what's already there, you betcha. And again, I'm only half kidding when I say I wish that Pierce Downer maybe had moved in a different spot so we wouldn't have the challenges of Mother Nature that we can't control. We have to manage them the best we can, given where homes are. I mean, let's face it, there are homes throughout our community that should have never been built where they're built. They're built in floodplains. They're built in localized poor drainage areas.
Not floodplains, localized poor drainage areas.
Both.
Artifact created by village.
Well, it's only a demarcation created by village. The water was not created by us, sir. It was created by God. But the demarcation of an LPDA is simply a local designation that tends to be a place where, as I'm hearing both of you support, should not be built on. I don't hear anybody suggesting that we should take away the LPDAs and allow people to build on them. That would only increase the problem. But sir, I'm not arguing with you. I'm trying to address a whole bunch of issues that you raise, including things that are beyond the topic tonight, because I think that people in the audience and those watching at home deserve to hear a broader perspective in history. And we can talk about whether an LPDA should be designated an LPDA or not, but the reality is it's a demarcation that's designed to prevent worsening the problem. Floodplains also change. The county changes those. There are other agencies that change the demarcation. And sometimes you're a floodplain, sometimes you're not. Folks often ask us, well, why are we suddenly in one and we weren't before? We don't control that. FEMA and others do. That's a process that's going on right now in terms of what the floodplain maps look like. But my point is there are areas that flood that were built in a long time ago that shouldn't have been built in by today's standards. But they're there. And we do the best we can to manage them. And when I say we, I don't mean just this council. I mean councils for the last 20 years. Construction site management and residential redevelopment is another topic that was brought up. Again, not really what we're talking about tonight. A big topic that, again, this community and every community that is as attractive to live in as Downers Grove has faced. All of our neighbors face the same thing. How much height, width setback should you allow for any building? This community has revisited that on multiple occasions and again has become progressively more restrictive. Again, trying to achieve a balance between someone who is very upset that we're restricting what they can do with their own property, and yet their neighbors want to control what they do with their property. It's again, achieving a balance. What should I be able to say about what you should do with your property versus what you're allowed to do with your property? I think we used the phrase earlier this night that perfect should not be the enemy of good. None of this is perfect, but we're working on it. We are listening to the residents, and it's not just this council, it's prior councils and prior councils before them. We are trying to do the best we can with what we have, and it is a process. In terms of actual construction site management, if there are issues that people are not following our rules, you betcha, bring that to our attention because that shouldn't happen. And we have rules for a reason, they should be followed. If they're not being followed, then that is absolutely something, please tell us. I frankly don't know as I sit here whether it's better to have 4 houses being built at once or to make them all wait and have the disruption in the neighborhood go on for 4 times as long. I don't know. I just remember that years ago when the downtown was redeveloped, the entire street was closed down and the businesses were asked, do you want to do it over several years or do you want to do it all at once? And they decided to do it all at once because as horrible as it was over. And I'm not suggesting that that's the right answer. I just don't know whether we can tell people you can't build for a year because your neighbor's building, and is that a race to the permit window? I don't know. But fair question, and something that certainly when we next address, or future council next addresses, residential redevelopment, which is not just new houses, but again, people who decide to expand their existing homes, what can and should be allowed, trying to balance private property rights with the interests of the community, which is what we try to do. So again, I'm not trying to debate anyone. A number of topics were raised, and I just want to give some broader context to everyone here as well as those listening at home. That yes, we fully appreciate and understand that there are a lot of issues here. I'm sorry that your neighborhood has been so recently and sounds like severely impacted. We do the best we can. But thank you for being here. Thank you for participating. Thank you for engaging. And one last thing is we do have an opening on the Stormwater Floodplain and Oversight Commission. Sounds like you have some great jobs. I'd love to consider your appointment to it. If you haven't submitted an application, please do. It sounds like you have a great deal to add.
Okay, thank you. I'm interested.
Very good. Didn't mean to stop anyone else from asking questions, please. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Good evening, welcome.
Hi, I'm Jenny Garst. I live at 5230 Farrar Court, and I have some specific questions related to the new proposed regulations. The first one, you guys referred to the homeowners having choices. I just am not clear on what those choices are, other than like, okay, if you make your addition this big, then this is how. So if you can just circle back on that.
Sure. What we set up now is based on a change in net new impervious area, and based on our experience with the current code is once a resident or home builder gets to a point where a new set of regulations or more stringent regulations would kick in, they tend to choose to keep their impervious change lower and do things like permeable pavers, change the footprint of their house, change their site plan to mitigate against runoff issues. And that was built on this concept. In fact, when you take a look at, I think it's the previous 2 slides up, one more table up, you can see on this slide here how there's a significant jump in the amount of storage that's required between the second category and the third category, and that is designed to provide a strong incentive to trade design elements to stay under those thresholds.
Okay, perfect, thank you. My next question is the all new construction is required to have a sump pump installed with a new foundation to discharge into a 50 cubic foot storage infiltration system. How much rainfall does that 50 cubic foot, and I know you're going to say, well, 50 cubic feet. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, how many inches of rainfall will that be effective for? Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay.
So I'm going to buy our Public Works Director some time to get the answer in inches, but we did anticipate this general question. Basic question.
Would you like to do a phone a friend, or?
I will like to phone a friend. So as
to do the hydraulic calculation.
As Nan figures out what design element these accommodate. Here's basically what's happening is, these are set up so that when you look at the change in net new impervious area, the amount of volume required should handle for that change somewhere between maybe 75 to 90% of the storms. Now, on the sump pump alone, which we think is going to be incredibly rare, so you're talking about just an addition that requires a new foundation with a brand-new sump pump. So the 50 cubic feet of storage there is really not so much a storage requirement, it's more of a dissipation issue. It's designed to take the water dissipated under the ground in that 2-foot area to try to mitigate against runoff going directly on your neighbors like in a stream.
Right, so it's like a really big French drain.
Yes.
Okay.
You got it.
And then I know that the next two steps are that staff is going to be given direction for the ordinance to be prepared, and then after that, there's going to be a voting meeting. How long can we expect that to be?
I think that's a question of...
I'll phone my friend right next to me on this one.
Now, we're going to put everybody on the spot tonight. Now we'll put our village attorney on the spot, which goes to what the reasonable time frame is for preparation of the ordinance to bring it before the council for our workshop, given our meeting schedule.
Yes, depending on what's on the agenda, I'd say second meeting in October probably for our first reading.
Well, it could be 30 days.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, guys. This is really encouraging. The last meeting I left very feeling like nothing's ever going to happen. There's no hope. So good work, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your continued participation and engagement. Input's been greatly appreciated. We too felt that sense of frustration of the proverbial head against the concrete wall. And I think you heard from the council tonight that while not perfect, we do want to move forward something that is a significant improvement with respect to new projects. Other questions or comments? Please. Good evening, welcome.
Hi, my name is Joe Ivanelli. I live at 5621 Plymouth. Had a couple questions regarding the proposed amendment. Just in terms of a more technical standpoint, what's below grade on these systems? Is it like a sand soil medium mix, or is it going to be strictly topsoil?
We clearly have crossed in the area where Nan can better answer these questions, so I'm going to ask our director, Nan, the one to give it a shot there.
Sounds like it's time to bring an engineer up.
Yes.
I'm just going to defer because we really don't have that level of detail at this point. I mean, we'll be coming up with some standards. I think it's basically going to be excavated like we are currently doing with dry wells, like they're being put in the, where we're requiring the PCBMPs, very similar to what's currently being constructed.
Okay, so the short answer is, with the directions given as part of the ordinance preparation, we'll be getting into some of the more granular details. I can tell you exactly what one looks like because I had one put on one of my former properties about 7 years ago. It cost me exactly $7,000. And it was extremely effective.
So I think I'll offer this as a planner, not an engineer. How this would really work is you go about if you choose to provide the storage in a shallow system, you go about 2 feet down. You'd stay above the line in the soil where it turns to clay, and it would be a series of perforated pipes in stone.
Yep.
That would just kind of collect the water and let it dissipate slowly over time.
It's wrapped in some kind of a landscaping cloth.
Yeah, sometimes it has a cloth in it, and this will vary site by site. On the sites that have the ability to connect their storage system to our stormwater system by gravity, a pipe will be required to connect those two systems, and so the underlying base is not as important as the connection to the pipe.
I'm only half kidding when I say we should pull out the drawings from the one that, because I did it voluntarily years ago to avoid causing a problem for my neighbor, and actually sought the village's assistant way back when I wasn't mayor at the time. Well, I want to do it right, want to be effective, and there was some, bless you, there was some guidance on what the design looked like. If we still have it laying around somewhere, all I know is over on the Cornell Avenue, it worked really well.
Okay. That provides some more information. And I guess taking a step back, after reading through this, it's a much better than the previous amendments. I think it's a step in the right direction in terms of feasibility. Just kind of playing devil's advocate, I still feel like if we're providing around 1,000 cubic feet of storage per lot and throwing maybe $25,000 at that, it's just not a great cost-benefit ratio. I mean, if there were some sort of way to send that 25 grand to the village for a fund to do some major regional improvements. It served a lot more properties in the long term on a much better standpoint.
I only want to interrupt you because the fee in lieu of has been great in concept, but in this area and other areas, not so good in practice. I mean, good idea. We tried that. We've tried that with sidewalks. We've tried that with stormwater, and it just hasn't worked.
Okay.
We have actually tried less invasive things, the theory of try the least invasive things first, but then when they don't work, you have to go the next step.
Gotcha.
And so you're not wrong to raise that idea, but we've gone that route in the past, and it's been ineffective.
Okay. And then, sorry, when's the next meeting on this? Is there going to be another one in the upcoming weeks?
There'll be at least 2.
2 more?
Probably in mid-October, and then we'll actually have an ordinance drafted, which will have some of the technicalities.
Okay. Very good, thank you.
And in the interim, don't hesitate to communicate with anyone, staff or council, about any of your concerns.
Okay, sounds good, thanks.
Thank you for being here. Other questions or comments from the audience on the proposed stormwater regulations? And again, we're not even at the ordinance drafting phase, although it sounds to me, if I'm reading the cards correctly here, that that's going to be the next step. But there's opportunity for additional comments and feedback as people digest everything. Okay, well then, let me, if there are no other further comments from the audience at this point, let me turn back to the council based on the discussion. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Waldeck is itching to get his hand up. Commissioner Waldeck.
Well, I just thought I'd put it out there. Thanks again, Mayor. I appreciate your comments in answer to the residents. They brought up some many good points. I might add that, well, it's hard to fix problems that, don't exist or aren't recognized at the time, and as you say, over time they become a problem, then you address them. For properties that were built in floodplains, we've actually spent millions of taxpayer dollars just to tear them down. So, it was a problem. We tried to address it. These places were built a long time ago, shouldn't have been there. And it cost taxpayers a lot. The questions that were put forward to Nan, every week we have questions coming from the council members and questions coming from residents and remarks. And so I hope that the answers, the questions that were put tonight would be put on next week's either council responses or remarks from residents. So we got those answers written up in time for the next meeting. That would be great.
We'll consider that you asked all those questions.
Pardon?
We'll just consider that you asked all those questions.
There we go.
So they'll be answered.
You can add my name to it if you want, but better that comes from the residents. Two of the top problems that questions that we get are stormwater and construction problems. And as the mayor pointed out, if there's violations of current construction, certainly report it. Hopefully, staff will get out there and resolve those. But it does intrigue me that that you can disrupt the neighborhood with multiple construction sites going on at the same time. And I would also ask staff maybe to look at and consider some possibilities of limitations, maybe in terms of traffic, safety for schools, school travel and the like. When we do have major construction areas, they do greatly disrupt the neighborhood, but as the mayor pointed out, sometimes it's better to get it, to get her done. So if staff could look at that and see some, check some possibilities so we don't have, in addition to all these construction challenges that we always face, just disrupting an entire neighborhood because of multiple sites at the same time. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to echo something that Commissioner Waldeck just mentioned, we have purchased a number of properties that are in floodplains, but I would just point out that in addition to some taxpayer dollars, we've also gotten, I believe it's federal grants for some of those, if not all of them, and they've helped to mitigate the impact on the Downers Grove taxpayer. I think it's important to point out, as the mayor started to a bit ago, that the LPDAs are just kind of, they just are. Reading right off the village website, they're areas of land that are bowl-shaped. I don't think it comes as a surprise that water that falls into a bowl would stay in the bowl. And I think the important part is right now that we're trying to stop more water from flowing into it. And that's what this is designed to do. You're right, this is a solution that's come far too late for a lot of people. But I think it's important that we're getting there now. And it may not be the end of the fixes. There's obviously more to do. We've got a report from 2013, 2014 that says we've got an awful lot of additional infrastructure to put in, and we've got a long-term commitment to do it. So this is just one more step toward mitigating to the largest extent possible the flooding problem we have. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Earl?
I just want to say thank you to the residents for being here tonight, especially those of you who are suffering with the construction. I myself have gone through that in my neighborhood where you get a lot of construction, and several houses at once or one after the other, which is what seems to be happening in my neighborhood right now. It's difficult to live with, and I feel for you. And it seems like that's the longest you never knew construction could go on that long, that the season was quite as long as it really is. Just know that there are so many things that we actually have done that have come from resident-driven initiatives, like 15, 20 years ago, that big white sign that says all the construction rules on it. That was there because of residents' initiative. The fencing around the property while the construction is going on, that is there because of resident initiative. So we do, and I know previous councils and this council try very hard to move it forward and try to keep things getting better instead of worse for the residents who are living with this turnover and in their neighborhoods. Know also that and Dave can tell you, I think I complained last week when I saw a code violation myself. There was some fencing that was not being properly maintained, and I brought it in myself, and it's been fixed this week. But unless somebody brings it to somebody's attention, sometimes it just it goes and it goes by. And you can complain. If you complain about it to us, at least we can help you to get a remedy for that situation. That goes for anybody at home who's living through it now and suffering with it now. Please let us know if there's a problem with it so that we can help you not have to suffer as much. So that's all I have to say. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. And on that note, on the village website, there is reference to the Downers Grove Community Response Center app, where it's as easy as using downloading an app onto your smartphone to report any issues, make requests for service, as well as traditional ways of calling. I won't take the time to go through it, but we try to make as many ways as possible for residents to do exactly what Commissioner Earl just said, which is to take a picture, put it in, and it will automatically link to the groups of people within the organization that are responsible for that enforcement. We try to make those tools available, utilizing technology as well as the good old-fashioned sending letters or picking up the phone. So when people do see things, we try to be as responsive as possible and provide tools to enable and facilitate residents to bring that to the attention of the appropriate individuals. I think it's on Get the CRC app is on the front page of the website. I just happened to look down and see it. Other questions from council?
Can I just make a
Of course.
quick request potentially of staff? I know some residents mentioned traffic control on Oakwood around the school. Is there any way we can look into doing that for arrival and dismissal times, just so we've got some presence there? I don't know if that's already there, but it was mentioned, and I just wanted to address it.
Yes, it's already there, and after we met with the residents on Oakwood, this has been a targeted enforcement area, and we've expanded that targeted enforcement area to other blocks near this block, experiencing similar things, so we'll continue to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I got the sense that there was pretty clear unanimous direction to prepare an ordinance.
We will do so. And that ends our manager's report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. And I echo Commissioner Earl's comments about throughout this entire process that we've been at for a year. We really appreciate all the resident input. and all the different stakeholders who have provided input, pointed out where maybe we're not getting it right, maybe we need to change a little bit. So I think that's been helpful in getting us to where we are today and making that lunge forward. So with that, we'll go to item 9. I'm sorry, not item 9. You don't want to repeat that, do you?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll go to item 10, Attorney's Report. Ms. Petrarca, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor. Only one item to present tonight, and that is an ordinance establishing a special service area number 10 for the Bridge Point subdivision. Thank you, Mayor.
Terrific. Thank you very much. It brings us to item 11, which is reserved for council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to report either on things of interest or other goings on in the community that those at home would like to share, or on something that is stemming from their role as a liaison to another public board. And I was going to start with, as advertised earlier, Commissioner Wallace, because
Thank you,
I
Mayor.
think something's
appreciate
going on
you
this weekend.
You not stealing my report here. Oktoberfest is going on this weekend, September 14th and 15th, run by the Education Foundation of District 58. You can attend Friday from 3 to 11, Saturday 11 to 11, and the kids zone is open on Saturday from noon to 7. So go support our local school district, face painting, dog tank, food, drinks, live music. Exceptional. Thank you, Mayor.
Fun times in downtown Downers Grove.
Absolutely.
Gotta love it. Thank you. Commissioner Burnett, good evening.
Mayor, I have no report.
Thank you. Commissioner Jose.
No report, Mayor, thank you.
I just feel like tennis. Commissioner Earl.
Yes, I have a report, Mayor. Tomorrow, the all-new driving range shelter at the Downers Grove Golf Club will be opening. They'll have a grand opening celebration tomorrow, Wednesday, September 12th, from 5 to 7 p.m. at the golf club at 2420 Haddow Avenue. There will be a dedication ceremony at 6 and a free small bucket of balls at the driving range all day tomorrow. So anytime tomorrow that you can get over there, that you can test this out. There will be some free giveaways and golf club demonstrations by Cleveland Golf, and they'd like to thank the Park District would like to thank their sponsors, which are City Barbecue, Gordon Food Services, and Cleveland Golf. The driving range shelter will provide an extended golf season, keep golfers more comfortable on hot and cold days, covers 10 of the existing 24 hitting stations, and features infrared heaters, lights, and ceiling fans and garage doors with 20 solar roof panels that they anticipate being installed this fall. So that is my report, Mayor.
And absolutely none of that would do anything to improve my driving. But that sounds like a terrific facility. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Waldeck.
Thank you, Mayor. The Downtown Management Corporation had its annual meeting on Thursday. Want to thank you for your comments. They had elections for new boards, so welcome to the new board members made up of property and business owners. The meeting went well, and one of the highlights was staff's video about the changes made to the downtown over the past 19 years. Just fabulous to look at. So the meeting went well, and welcome to the new board members. Thanks.
We should cue it up.
We should sometime.
All right, we'll do it next time.
Next time, sorry.
Fair enough. I need something you gotta ask sometime. Commissioner White.
Just one brief item. As many people know, I'm affiliated with a local nonprofit, DG Frog, which has been offering enrichment classes for elementary students for 30, 40 years, a long, long time. And the website for this fall's registration will open tomorrow. And there are 40 classes offered, ranging from cupcake decorating to I'm teaching a class on flying quadrotors. And there'll be more details to come on that. But look up DG Frog. There'll be 40 classes available to sign up for starting tomorrow.
Very exciting. Thank you for sharing that. I have no further report. We cannot adjourn. We do need to go into an executive session to consider some collective bargaining matters, but we will not be coming back out for any voting tonight. So with that, I will ask to convene into closed session pursuant to the specific provision of the Illinois Code that Commissioner White is about to read.
I move the council convene into closed session pursuant to Section 2C2 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act to consider collective negotiating matters between the village and its employees or their representatives.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are convened in closed session. For those of you here listening and watching at home, thank you and have a good night.